All right, good morning, church. We are going to turn our Bibles to John chapter 11, and we're going to read a nice chunk out of this chapter. And before we get started reading here, I want to share with you a really, really cool illustration here that I found. And it's very, very related to what we're going to be talking about today. And so it goes like this. 8-year-old Philip, born with Down syndrome, attended a third grade Sunday school class with several other 8-year-old boys and girls. Typical of that age, the children did not readily accept Philip with his differences, according to an article in a leadership magazine. But because of a creative teacher, they began to care about Philip and accept him as part of the group, though not fully. The Sunday after Easter, the teacher brought these pantyhose containers, the kind that kind of look like large eggs. Each receiving one, the children were told to go outside on that lovely spring day, find some symbol for new life, and put it in the egg-like container. Back in the classroom, they would share their new life symbols, opening the containers one by one in surprise fashion. After running about the church property in wild confusion, the students returned to the classroom and placed the containers on the table. Surrounded by the children, the teacher began to open them one by one. After each one, whether a flower, butterfly, or leaf, the class would ooh and ah. Then one was opened, revealing nothing inside. The children exclaimed, "That's stupid. That's not fair. Somebody didn't do their assignment." Philip spoke up. "That's mine." "Philip, you don't ever do things right," the students retorted. "There's nothing there." "I did so do it," Philip insisted. "I did do it. It's empty. The tomb was empty." Silence followed. From then on, Philip became a full member of the class. He died not long afterward from an infection most normal children would have shrugged off. At the funeral, this class of 8-year-olds marched up to the altar, not with flowers, but with their Sunday school teacher, each to lay on it an empty pantyhose egg. Not only is this a very sweet story, but it helps emphasize the power of resurrection and what it did for us and us having new life. And today, we're going to talk about another resurrection story, a miracle performed by Jesus that is also remarkable in different ways. So we're going to kind of break down this passage. We're going to read a lot of John chapter 11, but we're going to break it down part by part. So we'll start here. We're going to start here in verse 1. And it says here, John 11:1 says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.' When he heard this, Jesus said, 'This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it.'" Many of us may have heard the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. Jesus had a close relationship with this family. I find it super cool that we see recurring characters in the Gospels like this, right? And here's another fun fact. The name Lazarus is the Greek form of the name Eleazar, which means God is my help. Very fitting. And the thing to note here is that the purpose of this hardship. Jesus says this is for God's glory, so that he may be glorified through it. This hardship doesn't end in tragedy. It ends with God's glory. For us as Christians, hardship is never meant to be meaningless. That's what it feels sometimes, right? Sometimes it's the hardships that we go through in life. It just feels like there's no purpose for this. But it's meant to have a purpose. And from our end, we must have faith in that circumstance. And when we have faith, God does something amazing on our behalf so that he is glorified. Lazarus was sick and he died. Jesus came to him and his family, comforted them. They believed in him. He healed Lazarus, and he was glorified. The circumstance of every hardship in our lives is that when we have faith in him, in spite of that hardship, God does something amazing on our behalf so that he is glorified. Let's keep going here. It says here, as he went along, he saw a man. Oh, sorry, excuse me. We're looking at a new passage here. I want to refer to another passage here that talks more about Jesus and why he allows these kind of trials in our lives and how he uses that to glorify him. And so I'm going to quickly reference to John chapter 9. Now, if you want to read along here, you can read along if you want. We're going to start here in verse 1. It says here, as he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. This is another example of why hardship happens in someone's life. Except this was someone who faced a hardship since he was born. He lived his entire life until that point as a blind man. Some would say that this plan of God isn't justifiable. But this man could say he saw the glory of God in his healing. Church, if you knew what God knew about your circumstances, do you believe your perspective on the hardships you're facing now would be totally different? You know, a faithful heart is a peaceful heart. Don't miss out on the peace God wants you to have. You know, Charles Spurgeon, he's a very famous preacher from back in the day. He once said about this story about Lazarus, we should have said that the sickness was unto death, but ultimately to the glory of God. But he who sees the end from the beginning streaks with a grandeur of style which could not be imitated by us. So the Lord speaks of things not as they seem to be, nor even as they are in the present moment, but as they shall be in the long run. Having faith in God does not equate to acknowledging things by how they seem. Faith isn't acknowledging things how they are right now. Faith is acknowledging things in the grand scheme. Because will the past matter in the future? Will the present matter in the future? No, only the big picture will matter in the future. That's why God is invested in your future and why you should be too. As tempting as it is to feel, just a worldly sorrow, a sorrow that doesn't think about the grand scheme of things, this kind of sorrow in your hardships, we need to change our minds on them entirely. Do you see your hardships as a hopeless burden? Or do you see them as an opportunity to have faith that God will heal you and that God will be glorified? Amen. Romans 8:28 says, everything happens for the good of those who love God and who are called to his purpose. That is all of you. You are all called to God's purpose. Good is meant to come out of your hardships. Don't miss out on it. If you don't have faith, you will miss out on healing, deliverance, and God's glory. Look for God's power in your trial. Bring your hardship to God and have faith that he will bring healing, deliverance, and victory. And watch God answer and be glorified. We're going to go back to John chapter 11, and we're going to continue in verse 5. It says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. interestingly enough. And then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago, the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. Now, this is an interesting passage. Why did Jesus wait 2 more days before he went back to Lazarus? Like, if I was in Jesus' shoes, I would go right back right away. If I really loved Lazarus, right? If I loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, like I would go back right away, right? But, and from our perspective, it almost seems strange that he wouldn't immediately deal with this serious need. I wonder how Martha and Mary felt those 2 days waiting, maybe waiting for Jesus. And a huge part of our faith is acknowledging that God's timing is always better than ours. I want you to think about the struggle you're waiting for God to answer. Is there something that you've been waiting for weeks, months, years for God to deliver you from? If so, I'm so sorry that you've been facing that trial. It must be really difficult. Mary and Martha must have been in agony waiting for Jesus while their brother was dead. But Jesus knew the outcome and the timing, the perfect timing in this circumstance. In your circumstance, if it seems that hope is too far gone, you may not know or understand the full picture of God's plan. And that if you did know it, you would feel totally different about everything. While you wait for God's deliverance, have faith and trust in his plan, his timing, because when he answers, you won't regret it. Jesus was a man who understood timing, who understood risks, and knew when to take them. If Jesus had the heart to go to a place where people were trying to murder him out of love for someone, right, to go to that place, does Jesus not have the same heart for you? Would Jesus be willing to walk through a minefield for you? How could he not if he was willing to be whipped, flogged, beaten, and tortured for you? If he has that kind of heart towards you, then there must be a purpose for the delay in answering your prayers. It must be because he has you in mind and that he has God's glory in mind. Trust his process, church. In John 11, verse 11, we'll continue here. It says, after he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Have faith like Martha, church. In the midst of pain, she believed every word of Jesus. What words in the Bible do you need to cling to right now in your hardships? What promises of God will lift your spirits? If you can't think of any in the moment, they're in there. They're in the Bible. Promises of comfort, healing, deliverance, power, whatever you are going through, it is there. And it takes diligent Bible study, reading, meditation to get where you need to be. How are you doing with your personal Bible study? You need the spiritual armor of God at all times. Equip yourself as soon as you can before the enemy sees your vulnerabilities, and you will be safe in God's care. Verse 28, after she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been there, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. You know, people talk about this last verse here a lot, as we should. It's easy to forget how much Jesus understands us since we haven't met him face to face yet. And even though we haven't, he understands us as deeply as he would if we'd known him in the flesh for hundreds of years. He understands you more than anyone on this earth has ever understood you. And his love for you is so deep that he feels it in his heart. If you can imagine Jesus weeping over your hardships, then you're much closer to reality. His heart was broken over Mary and Martha's pain, and his heart is broken over your pain. And Jesus knew that he was going to heal Lazarus, yet he still wept. It tells us how much he connects with us in our pain. When you pray to God, remember this heart that he has for you. He loves you in more ways than you can count. He is deeply moved by what deeply moves you. Talk to him about everything because he wants to hear it from your mouth and he wants to heal you. Verse 36, then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Think about the very hardship that you are dealing with right now. If you believe, church, you will see the glory of God. Please don't miss out on the glory of God. Have faith in your God. Verse 41, so they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here and the people standing here, sitting here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Lazarus was dead for 4 days. His body was rotting. This is the power that your God has. And if he can do this, he can bless you. And if you're not yet a Christian, he can save you. Seek him with all your heart. Talk to the person who invited you out and make the best decision a human being can make. Choose God and choose God's life for you. You will not regret it. As we close out, I want us to think about the heart of God. A heart that cares, understands, even weeps over our hurt. Just because you may not be able to physically hear him does not mean that he is far off, not attentive to your life. If you could see him in the flesh and you could see his face hurting over the pain that you feel, you would never doubt again how unbelievably devoted he is to you. And I want us to think about his wisdom, how his timing is perfect in every circumstance. And that we just need to rest easy out of faith in him, that he will bring forth the healing, deliverance, and blessings that we call on him for. And of course, act out when he wants us to act out. And finally, we need to think about the power of God, who raised a rotting corpse from the dead and raised the perfect lamb from the dead 3 days after he died and gave us salvation. That is power. Remember all these things because the heart that God had for Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, he has for you.